Hello, we are coming to you today from the Russell County Library in Lebanon, and we're talking with Cyrus Alderwood. Cyrus is the author of Tales from the Sunset Pub, A Man Called Douche, Pot of Gold, and here's a great title, Bedtime Stories for the Terminally Afraid. Great title, Cyrus. Cyrus is a native of Tazewell County in Southwest Virginia, and he spends a lot of time volunteering for nonprofits, including one of our favorites, the Foundation for Appalachian Advancement. And you can find him all over the web. These days he's doing a lot of commentating about cultural and political events, and particularly on a blog called medium.com. Okay? He's just finished another book, a collection of short stories. He is a vice president of the Appalachian Authors Guild and a member of the Virginia Writers Club. He makes himself available for guest speaking, giving advice to authors on how to write, how to deal with writer's block. There's a good topic, and so on. And you can always find him, and I'll repeat this later, but you can find him on his website, which is www.cyrusalderwood.com. And we'll repeat that one later, and of course follow him on Facebook and Twitter. Okay? One of the books that I particularly like is this one called A Pot of Gold. And I'm not going to read you from the book itself. I'm going to give you a sense of Cyrus's sense of humor, because it really flows through all of his books. Okay? I know that as readers, people never read what we call the copyright page. The copyright page has an ISBN number and all that good stuff, and it almost always says this is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to real people is coincidental or is used fictionally. You probably don't even bother to read that, but if you have, that's what it says. This is what the copyright page for A Pot of Gold says. All characters and situations in this book are fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is coincidental. Seriously, if your situation resembles any of these scenarios, then you have a real problem on your hands. Go get help. And I love that. That is the right? That is the funniest copyright page I've ever read. But it does raise the question, Cyrus, okay, of what this book feels personal. Can you tell us about writing this book, aside from the wonderful opening page there?
Yeah, that book was very personal. I was at a period of time in my life where it seemed like nothing was going right. Nothing with business. Some family issues were coming up. I had a very ill father, and I was taking care of him as a kind of a home provider. And I was actually at a point of life, to then spare the details, it was a really dark depression. If you've never really been through a serious depression, then it's nothing really pretty to go through. But I started to write this book because being that down and being that depressed is not who I am. And my friends were telling me that. And so I sat down with a couple of friends and we're talking about some goofy characters and ways to make fun of yourself. And I'm always the first person to make light of any situation that I'm in. So that's where this book sort of came from. I had to teach myself how to laugh again. That's basically what was going on with this book. So I sat down and plotted out these characters who were kind of going through some similar things that I was going through, and just how in the world are you going to laugh at yourself? And that book actually was a real godsend for me to write. And it was one of those that, honestly, if I'm sitting there writing a scene and I'm laughing out loud writing the book. So I thought to myself, hey, if I'm thinking it's this funny, trying to write this, it's probably some pretty good stuff. So anyway, I finished that book and got that out. It was kind of kind of put me in a much better light, a much better place in life, just because of a mindset, basically, to kind of work through things that were going on at that time personally. So yeah, that book has got a personal feel all through it.
Yes, it does.
But it's one of these things. If you don't find something to laugh at every couple of pages, I felt like I didn't do my job in this one. So
well, one does.
I tried to have that good flow all the way through.
Yes, absolutely. You want to tell us about your other books before we move on?
Yeah, the second book, I had to follow that one up with another one, and I kept thinking, what kind of theme do I want to have? And that one it was a lot about perseverance. And I love that concept of the place where you lose yourself and you find yourself. So that was in there too, but I didn't want to kind of repeat the same theme. But perseverance was a very important thing for me in my life. So I wrote this book about a character by the name of Eddie Duchesne, okay? And he has an unfortunate nickname, and it's a book called A Man Called Douche. So that unfortunate nickname this guy got stuck with. And essentially what that book is, when I was a kid growing up, like every young kid, every young boy, we tend to watch a lot of ridiculous things on TV, from the cartoons of our choice to every Saturday at 6:05 watching pro wrestling when you're a kid, right? So I based this character who was having economic turmoil. He's a millennial. He's newly married. His wife is pregnant. And he just found out that they got downsized at work. And it's not the job he thought he would have coming out of college. And so anyway, he's stuck at this call center type job and loses his health insurance. And they have to make up for it. And he doesn't want his wife to take a second job. So he takes a weekend job. And what does this character do? He decides, hey, if I'm going to be working my butt off, I want to do something I've dreamed of. So this fool goes out and joins the Tampa professional wrestling circuit. And the brains behind the entire operation, what he was doing, is his wife. As she kind of goes through her pregnancy, she comes up with this idea of, let's make this guy a star on social media, so they have to hire him because he sucks at what he's doing, right? He's trying to learn how to be a wrestler, and he's just not that great. But he's all mouth and personality, and that's what they were looking for. So this local wrestling operation, it's about to go under, hires this guy, and he starts bringing the audience in. And it's all the crazy stuff that happens in the process of not just ticking off all the other wrestlers, but how are you going to get it to be a big viral hit on social media like YouTube? Well, this is where you bring in eye candy, thanks to his wife and her friends. And it's just a slapstick, comedy, college humor kind of book. So I had to keep the laughter going. My latest one's called Tales from the Sunset Pub. And this is just a collection of short stories that I based loosely on a group of friends from Cincinnati. Sunset Pub is a real place, and actually I'll read you the intro to this one.
Oh, good.
This book is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, places, or events is coincidental. In fact, if your life resembles some of these events, I would drop what you're doing and seek professional help. Dedicated to my old pals at the Sunset Pub. You know who you are. So I changed everybody's name to something else, except my buddy Doug. He's screwed. So now he's got a great sense of humor. He's like salt of the earth guy. And I based a series of short stories, cross genres actually. Some are funny. There's a couple that are actually more in the suspense or dramatic type stories about what goes on downtown in the inner cities, and the corruption of different officials in town. And I base these off of things that have happened, and stories like the one of my favorite stories in this book is called What Happens in Vegas. And it was a trip, unfortunately, I didn't get to make, but these savages I call friends went out there and come back and had all kinds of stories. And I just made up this crazy thing about what would happen with all of us out in Las Vegas at the same time. So, yeah, if you want some slapstick comedy, that one is, this is probably one of the most creative books I think I've worked on so far.
Cool. But now you have a collection of short stories, the bedtime stories for the terminally afraid.
Right.
And you're working right now on another book that's a collection of horror stories. So you also do the horror genre.
Yeah.
Which would seem to be pretty far from the the humor genre that we have here.
Actually, yes and no. I'd say in some sense not so much, because growing up I would watch a lot of horror films, and when you're a kid they terrify you, but when you're a little older and you go back and watch these things like Nightmare on Elm Street and Part 2, and then you watch maybe the Jason series, the Friday the 13th, how ridiculous some of this stuff was. And you have to actually you can kind of look and see where people are actually just being goofy and having fun. And so there's always some sort of comedy, especially in the Nightmare series that went on. All the little one-liners from the Freddy Krueger character that just were goofy and funny, and the things that happened. So I kind of relate the two in some degree, but the horror that I have written is not anything. Well, just a couple of them that are kind of humorous, but most of them are just traditional type horror. But I try to put a twist at the end because I don't like anybody to be able to guess at what's happening next.
That raises the question, since you're moving across genres, that are you trying to deliver what you think people want in a particular genre? Are you trying to be more original and just sort of do your thing? It's hard these days to balance that. I know.
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think, because Yeah, if you don't write something people want to read, they're not going to read your books. So I try to give readers something they want, but as an artist, you kind of want to be as original as you can be, because if you look at all, especially horror, there's nothing new under the sun. So how are you going to give a new twist to something like a vampire story or a zombie story or what? But yet I do. I put a new, something you've never read before. In the bedtime stories, there's one story in there called Game Set Match. It's a vampire story. But you have never read a vampire story like this in your life, trust me. When you get to the ending, you'll be like, my God, how did I not see that coming? And the same thing with a zombie story I wrote in there that's called Run for Your Life, Fat Boy. Because I kept thinking, what if I was on my way to work in a city, carpooling, and the apocalypse had happened. I'm right in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, and how am I going to survive? So it's one of these things, how the zombies are not what you think they are, and how this idiot manages to survive like a week out, on his own. So it's it's one of those things. It's like, yeah, I've never read that either. So, but I try to tackle some because people like those kind of stories. They're kind of popular now.
So is it hard to switch back and forth to go across genres? Is that...
Not from comedy to horror per se, but when I'm trying to write something a little bit more dramatic, like one of the stories that was in Sunset Pub called Saints and Sinners was really is really harrowing story about I read this in a newspaper actually. Years ago, there was a priest in Boston that was actually running drugs through the church. No one knew it, and he had a friend of his who was a police officer. I think that was kind of the muscle for him. So I remember reading something like that, and another story from Rolling Stone about a Vietnam vet trying to make his way home and got killed one day before he got shipped back. And what he had written a letter home about was falling down in the tunnels in Vietnam in Khe Sanh and being stuck down in the tunnels until somebody managed to rescue him out of there. And you read these things and you think, wow, this is heart-wrenching and heartbreaking, terrifying actually. So I kind of based some of those off of that, but going from comedy or horror to something more dramatic is a little bit more of a stretch because I have to actually get away from those two genres for a little while before I can even start on something like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. You have to have your head just right for those things. Yeah. So along those lines, what books do you read? I mean, what inspires you? What's influenced you?
Probably one of the biggest influences right now is just read the headlines. If you want something creepy or dramatic, there's you just pick up a headline off the internet from a Mexican newspaper, and you got nightmares for real. I read across all genres, and I try not to stick to one. One of the least amount of I don't read a lot of horror, to be honest with you, and I really don't read that much comedy, but I enjoy the movies. But what lately I've been stuck, just fascinated with the beat writers of the 50s. So I've been reading a lot of Jack Kerouac and Ferlinghetti. One of my all-time favorites, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So when you read something back in that time period, that genre, and just how meticulous this guy was about writing his books, it inspires you because you read a good book, and it's not, Great Gatsby's not that big of a book, but when you go back and look at the amount of notes that guy took to write that book, it's twice the size of the book. So you can kind of see, how important detail and things like that are, and I think that's, despite his alcoholism and Hemingway's alcoholism, they're incredibly professional with how they approach their work. Right. So, but I read a lot of classics and a lot of stuff from the beat writer generation, and some up through the '60s, and a lot of business type books too, and inspirational stuff. So, yeah, a little bit of everything. Cool. I just pick up inspiration from pretty much anywhere.
Excellent. You said you're doing some blogs about how to help first-time writers.
Yeah, actually.
Tell us quickly about that and where a first-time writer might go to find.
Yeah, on my website, cyrusalderwood.com, there's tabs at the top. Click on blog, and at the very top of it, I'm actually putting what are my steps in writing a book to help first-time writers, from the creative process to developing a lot of people get confused between plot and theme. How do you go about that? Things you need to do before you sit down and start beating on the keyboard. And I'm in the process of writing that series. I actually post that up, links on my Facebook page, so that you can click on it from there, or Twitter.
Okay.
And you can find me on Facebook and Twitter, just author Cyrus Alderwood, and then Cyrus Alderwood on Twitter. And I do write some blog pieces on medium.com where I'm actually posting that up for people to link over to that, because I'm kind of trying to drive the traffic to my website instead of out there. But eventually I'll end up putting them out there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good for people who want to read and people who want to write. Find Cyrus Alderwood.
Yep.
CyrusAlderwood.com.
Just trying to help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for your time.
Great to talk to you.